The Scarecrow. The Scarecrow is a scary story about a farmer who builds the scariest and most hideous of all scarecrows to take care of his farm. There was an old farmer in Arizona who owned the best farm in the area. Everybody said his crops were the best, and people came from all over to buy goods from him. Whenever people asked him how he was able to grow such high-quality crops, the old farmer would say, "It was all thanks to his scarecrow." "That old scarecrow is the one I have to thank," said the farmer. "He makes sure no crows, critters, or pests come near my crops." The old farmer had built the scarecrow himself, and it was a fearsome sight. He spent months working on it to make it as terrifying as possible, knowing how essential it was to keep pests away from his crops. So he gave it enormous straw arms that stretched out about 6 feet in long, sturdy legs that made it as tall as a tree. But the scariest thing about this scarecrow was its head. The farmer carved it himself out of a massive pumpkin, spending countless days and nights perfecting the design until it was just right. The scarecrow's face was so grotesque and ugly that even he sometimes found himself frightened to look at it, but it was very effective, scaring away every rodent and bird that dared come near. The neighboring farm was owned by 2 young men who were brothers named Josh and Harold. They were lazy and never did much work around their farm, which resulted in their crops being poor. They were jealous of the old farmer's success and were plotting against him. If they could drive him out of business, they could take over his farm and make more money. So one night, the brothers decided to sneak onto the old farmer's land. They stole his prized scarecrow and brought it back to their own house, where they stuffed it into an old closet so nobody would ever find it. The next day, the farmer woke up to find his hideous scarecrow missing and all his crops being eaten by rats and crows. He fell to his knees and cried, knowing that his farm would soon be out of business. Meanwhile, the brothers, Josh and Harold, were watching from their own property and couldn't help laughing out loud when they saw the old man's tears of grief. Hearing the laughter, the old farmer came over and asked them if they knew what had happened to his scarecrow. The brothers looked him right in the eye and said they had no idea where his precious scarecrow might be. "But you know I'll go out of business and have to sell my farm if I can't find my scarecrow," said the farmer. Josh just laughed in his face, saying, "That's just your tough luck, isn't it?" "Sucks to be you," giggled Harold. The old farmer walked slowly back to his house, his head hanging down in defeat and depression. That night, Josh and Harold had trouble sleeping, not because they felt any remorse, but because they couldn't get the image of the scarecrow's horribly twisted face out of their minds. They decided they would never be able to sleep as long as that ugly pumpkin head was in their house. So they got up and dragged the scarecrow out of the closet. Harold took a baseball bat and smashed the scarecrow's head to pieces until all that was left were little bits of pumpkin strewn across the floor. The brothers swept up the pumpkin head pieces and threw them in the trash. Then, they went back to bed and were soon fast asleep, having put all thoughts of the disgusting scarecrow face out of their heads. Sometime after midnight, Josh and Harold were awoken by the sounds of scratching and clawing at their bedroom door. "Did you forget to put the dog out?" asked Harold sleepily. We don't have a dog," stammered Josh. Suddenly, the bedroom door burst open and a solitary, long straw arm snaked in through the opening. Then a second arm thrashed around, followed by 2 long stick legs. The 2 brothers were frozen in fear and could only look with horror as the headless scarecrow's body rose up on its long stick legs, its long arms reaching out for them in the darkness. Harold felt a cold, sinewy straw claw close around his ankle and screamed as loud as he could. He begged his brother Josh to help him, but Josh was already running out of the bedroom. Fleeing in terror, he ran down the hallway, crashed through the front door, and out onto the moonlit road. He ran as fast as his legs could carry him, puffing and panting, screaming at the top of his voice. As he passed his neighbor's house, he saw the old farmer standing at his gate. In the moonlight, he could see the farmer just staring at him with a strange smile on his face. Josh kept running, his bare feet slapping against the rough gravel road. He glanced back over his shoulder and saw something that scared him to his very soul. He saw the scarecrow running along the road close behind him. It was gaining on him, coming closer and closer. And that wasn't all he saw. He noticed that the scarecrow had a brand new head, and it looked a lot like Harold. The story 2. The Red Spot is a short, scary story about a young girl who wakes up one morning with a strange blemish on her face. It is based on an urban legend called the spider bite, or spiders in the cheek. A version of this story appeared in Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark by Alvin Schwartz. One night, a young girl was sleeping in her bed when a spider crawled across her face. It stopped for a few minutes on her left cheek, then went on its way. When she woke up the next morning and looked in the mirror, she noticed a red spot on her cheek. "What's this?" she asked her mother. "It looks like a spider bite," her mother replied. "It will go away, just don't scratch it." Soon, the small red spot grew into a big red boil. "Look at it now," the girl said. "It's getting bigger." "That sometimes happens," her mother said. "It's coming to a head." In a few days, the red spot was even larger. "Look at it now," the girl said. "It hurts so much, and it makes me look so ugly." "We'll have the doctor look at it," her mother said. "Maybe it's infected." But the doctor couldn't see the girl until the next day. That night, she decided to take a nice, relaxing bath. As she lay soaking in the warm water, the boil suddenly burst. Out poured a swarm of tiny spiders from the eggs their mother had laid in her cheek. The story 3. High Beams is a scary story about a young woman who goes out for drinks with her friends one night and decides to drive home on her own. A version of this story appeared in the book Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. As the woman drove down a deserted highway, she noticed a lone pair of headlights quickly approaching her car from behind. When the car came closer, she noticed that it was going to overtake her. The car drew up beside her, but then the driver suddenly swerved back behind her car. She started getting nervous and kept an eye on the strange car in her rearview mirror. He pulled up dangerously close to her rear bumper and began flashing his high beams at her. The headlights dimmed for a moment, but then the high beams flashed again, and the car behind her surged forward. The car followed her very closely, and on tight curves or over hills, he would flash his high beams on and off. The frightened woman struggled to keep her eyes on the road and fought the urge to keep looking at the car behind her. Finally, she approached her exit, but the car continued to follow, flashing the high beams again and again. The terrified woman took out her mobile phone and dialed 911. When the operator answered, the woman screamed into the phone, "A car is following me. He keeps tailgating and blinking his lights at me." The woman gave her address, and in a few minutes, she saw the red and blue lights of a police car in the distance. She breathed a sigh of relief as she pulled into her driveway, but suddenly the strange car pulled into the driveway behind her and began blinking its lights on and off like a maniac. The police car screeched to a halt on the woman's front lawn, and 2 police officers jumped out with their guns drawn. They pulled the man out of the strange car and forced him to lie face down on the lawn. Then they handcuffed him as he screamed, "There's someone in her car! There's someone in her car!" The 2 policemen suddenly pointed their guns in the woman's direction and fired. The woman screamed, but when she turned around, she saw the bloody corpse of a murderer fall out of her back seat. There was a large butcher knife still clasped in his cold, dead hand. The police searched her back seat and found duct tape, a blindfold, and a pair of handcuffs lying there. The woman realized that the man in the strange car had been trying to save her. When the police released him, he explained that as he pulled up behind her car and his headlights lit up her back seat, he had seen a man with a butcher knife rising up behind her. Just as the madman was about to stab her, he flashed his high beams and the figure crouched back down. "I flashed my high beams every time I saw him raise the knife," he said. The story 4. The Red Ribbon is a short, scary story for kids about a girl who wears something around her neck that she refuses to take off. It is also known as the red satin ribbon, the velvet ribbon, and the yellow ribbon. A version of this story appeared in Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Bill whistled as he strolled through the park. He was on his way to meet his girlfriend, Sally. He could smell spring in the air. He jingled the engagement ring in his pocket and thought about asking Sally to marry him. Sally sat down on a park bench, and Bill kneeled down in front of her. "Sally," Bill said, "you are the most beautiful girl I've ever met. I love you and I want you to be my wife. Will you marry me?" Sally laughed and said, "Yes, I will marry you." As Bill gazed lovingly at his bride-to-be, his eyes lingered on the red velvet ribbon Sally always wore around her neck. "Why do you always wear that red ribbon?" Bill asked. Sally said, "Bill, I must never take off my red ribbon." Bill smiled at Sally and left the ribbon alone. Bill and Sally were married that June. Bill found a lovely little house in a nice neighborhood and they moved in. Bill bought Sally many party dresses. But Sally always wore her red ribbon with each outfit. Bill thought this was odd. Sally just smiled and said, "I must never take off my red ribbon." After a few years, Sally found out she was going to have a baby. This news delighted Bill. Sally talked with her friends who had babies. Bill talked with his buddies who had children. They talked together late into the night about what they had learned from everyone. When the big day came, Sally said, "Please tell the doctor I must not take off my red ribbon." Bill was frustrated, but he promised Sally that he would tell the doctor. After the baby was born, Bill gave Sally flowers. "Thank you for the flowers, Bill," Sally said, "and thank you for telling the doctor I must not take off my red ribbon." Bill did not understand why the red ribbon was so important. "Do you want to hold little Billy?" Sally asked. Bill, Sally, and little Billy lived happily for many years in the small, lovely house in the nice neighborhood. When little Billy was a baby, he would sometimes reach for the red ribbon around his mother's neck. Sally would gently take his little hands in hers and coo at him, saying, "Mommy must never ever take off her red ribbon." The red ribbon had frustrated Bill for a long time. He loved Sally with all of his heart, but did not understand her need to wear the red ribbon. After many years, Bill had an idea. "Our anniversary is coming up. I will buy Sally a beautiful necklace. She will take off that old red ribbon so she can wear the beautiful necklace." Their anniversary came. Bill took Sally to a fancy restaurant overlooking Central Park. They had a delicious meal. Then Bill gave Sally a velvet box with a beautiful diamond necklace in it. She opened it, smiled, and tears came to her eyes. Bill put the necklace around her neck and started to take off the red ribbon. Sally stopped him. She said, "I must never take off my red ribbon." Bill sat back in his seat with a huff. He looked at Sally and shook his head. "I may never understand," Bill said. Sally gently placed the diamond necklace back in the velvet box and closed the lid. "It is lovely, Bill. I will treasure it always," she said. "But I must never take off my red ribbon." "Why?" Bill asked, as he had for so many years. Sally smiled sadly and shook her head. She did not answer him. Late that night, Bill was still awake. "I've loved Sally for more than 20 years, but she insists on wearing that horrible red ribbon around her neck. I think it's about time I found out why." Bill got out of bed and walked around to Sally's side. Bill carefully pinched the ends of the bow on the ribbon. He began to slowly pull on the ribbon. The bow became smaller and smaller. The loops of the bow pulled through and only a half knot was left. Bill slid his finger under the half knot and tugged. Zip! The red ribbon gave way. Pop! Sally's head. It rolled right to the floor, bouncing in the moonlight. One large tear fell from Sally's eye. "I warned you," she said. The story 5. The Hook, or the Hook Man, is a classic scary urban legend about a boyfriend and girlfriend who park in a deserted lover's lane one dark night. One summer evening, a teenage boy took his new girlfriend out on a date. He picked her up at her house and they drove to the edge of town. They parked the car in a secluded spot known as Lover's Lane, where many couples went to spend time alone. As they gazed out at the twinkling lights of the town, the boy wrapped his arm around the girl and turned on the car radio, setting the mood with some romantic music. They started kissing and cuddling, but just as they were getting lost in the moment, the music suddenly stopped. A newsreader's voice broke through the silence. "This is an emergency announcement. Earlier tonight, a crazed murderer escaped from the state mental asylum. Police are warning citizens to be on their guard, as the patient is considered armed and dangerous. The insane killer is nicknamed the Hook Man because, after he lost his right hand in an accident, it was replaced with a steel hook. Everyone in the area should be on the lookout for a man matching this description. If you see anything suspicious, please report it to the authorities immediately." The girl immediately became frightened and asked the boy to take her home. She knew that the asylum was nearby and realized how dangerous the situation was, especially in the remote, dark area where they were parked. The boy, trying to calm her down, insisted that they were perfectly safe. He locked all of the car doors, then tried to kiss her again. But the girl was frantic now and pushed him away, urging him to leave right away. In frustration, the boy slammed the car into gear and they quickly left the parking spot, spinning the wheels on the gravel. They both calmed down during the drive back to town, but the girl still clung tightly to her boyfriend's side. When they reached the girl's house, the boy got out of the car and walked around to open the door for her. But he didn't move right away. He just stood there, staring at the door. At first, the girl couldn't figure out what was wrong. Then, she realized her door was still locked. She smiled and unlocked it, but the boy didn't move. Confused, the girl rolled down her window and asked what was wrong. That's when she saw what the boy was staring at, the door handle. Slowly, she looked down, and as soon as she saw what was hanging there, she began to scream uncontrollably. There, hanging from the door handle, was a bloody stainless steel hook. Thank you for listening to my video. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe to follow upcoming videos. Have a great day.